perception.
Right.
We assume our eyes and ears are like mirrors, just passively reflecting what's out there. But what these sources suggest is that the brain doesn't actually experience reality. It predicts it.
Prediction, not observation. I mean, that is a huge concept, and that is our mission today. We're going to unpack the architecture of this predictive mind and, crucially, understand why the brain seems to value certainty, that feeling of being right, so much more than accuracy.
Yes.
So if you've ever wondered why someone, or maybe even yourself, hold on to a bad decision or a false belief way longer than seems logical, well, this deep dive is going to give you the blueprint.
And that blueprint, it really starts by accepting that we are all, to some extent, living in a simulation that our own mind has built. The research shows the brain is an architect, not a stenographer. It's building a story in real time. And if we want to understand our behavior, we have to look at the engineering behind that build.
Okay, let's get into that mechanism then, because this is really the foundation of the whole thing. The sources say that what we see, what we hear and feel, it isn't the world as it is right now. It's the mind making a really sophisticated guess about what should be there.
Based on everything you've ever experienced before. And then it just quietly makes these little adjustments when reality doesn't quite line up.
It's an efficiency thing then.
It's an incredibly efficient survival mechanism.
Yeah.
You should think of the brain less like a 4K video camera and more like a really good GPS. The GPS isn't scanning every single inch of the road. It's generating a hypothesis based on the map it has and your speed. It's always a step ahead.
So it's not just passively receiving data, it's actively creating hypotheses and then checking the data against them. That must save a ton of processing power.
A massive amount. And that leads to this really crucial detail the sources emphasize. We're not actually living in the present. We are living a few milliseconds ahead of it.
Wow.
The brain needs that tiny, tiny little gap to pre-process what's coming, to minimize surprise. If the prediction is good, reality feels smooth, seamless. If it's wrong, that's when you feel that jolt. That's a surprise, an error signal, and the brain has to scramble to update its story.
A few milliseconds ahead. So every moment of clarity, I feel, is really just my brain's prediction coming true just before it happens. I was so sure the road was empty on my drive this morning, but that was just my brain's best guess.
Exactly. That's the awareness you have to bring to it. We're always reacting to a future our brain has already written, and it works great, most of the time. But the consequences, that's where you start to see the cracks.
So what are those immediate real-world consequences? Because if my internal map is built on my unique history, then my predicted future is also going to be unique to me.
And that's it, right there. That's why this model explains one of the biggest paradoxes of human interaction. It's why two people can watch the exact same event, see the same things, hear the same words, and walk away with completely different truths.
Because their predictive models were different. They were built on different life experiences, different emotional baggage, so they literally generated different interpretations. They didn't just disagree on the facts. They actually experienced different realities.
Yes. Your brain isn't filtering for objective truth. It's filtering for data that confirms the model it's already running. And if new data conflicts with the model, the brain will it will first try to twist that data to make it fit. Or if it can't, it just dismisses it as unimportant.
Which brings us right to observational blind spots. I remember reading in one of the sources about how this explains why we miss things that are, completely obvious to an outsider. It's like that famous gorilla experiment.
The invisible gorilla, yes. It's a perfect example.
Where you're told to count basketball passes and you get so focused that you don't even see a guy in a gorilla suit walk through the middle of the screen.
Exactly. Because the brain's prediction is, I'm counting passes, the scene contains players and a ball. A gorilla doesn't fit the prediction, so for the sake of efficiency, your brain just edits it out. The cost of stopping everything to process gorilla is too high. It prioritizes the coherence of the story over getting every single detail right.
It's a staggering thought that my whole reality is just an optimized guess. And that optimization brings us to the core conflict of this deep dive, doesn't it? The big battle between the certainty and accuracy.
It's the heart of the matter.
Because if the brain is always trying to be efficient and coherent, it seems like it's choosing to be confident over being correct.
That's it. Confidence, according to these sources, beats accuracy so often because certainty is an efficiency shortcut. If your brain feels certain, it saves a huge amount of energy. It doesn't have to double check. It doesn't have to run risk assessments. It can just go.
Okay, before we go deeper, we should probably define our terms here. We're talking about certainty and accuracy, almost like they're enemies. How do the sources spell out the difference?
A very important distinction.
Hmm.
So accuracy in this context is about external validation. Is the statement true when you measure it against objective outside facts?
Okay.
But certainty is about internal consistency. It's a feeling. It's the measure of how well a belief fits into the story you already have about yourself and the world.
So when the brain prioritizes certainty, it's really just protecting its own story. And this is where it gets, frankly, a little uncomfortable. The sources don't pull any punches here. They basically say the brain doesn't ultimately care about objective truth. It cares about certainty.
This is the priority shift we have to get our heads around. When push comes to shove, when new contradictory information comes in, if the brain has to choose between being right, which means keeping its internal story intact, and being accurate, which means changing the story to fit the new facts, it will cling to being right every single time.
Hang on, if the brain is fundamentally wired this way for survival, how can we ever trust what we think? Doesn't that make objectivity, like, impossible?
It makes it incredibly difficult. It makes it something you have to work for consciously. The reason the brain does this, the reason it picks certainty, is because coherence is basically the operating system of the self.
Coherence as an operating system. I like that. What do you mean by that?
Well, think of your life story, your identity, as a really complex piece of software. Every belief, every memory is a line of code. Now, if you introduce a huge contradictory fact like, say, I'm not actually a good driver, when your whole identity is built on being a good driver, that doesn't just change one line of code.
It threatens to crash the whole program.
It risks crashing the entire operating system. The brain fights that instability because a consistent, even if flawed, story is much better for quick decisions and survival than a system that's constantly being updated and is full of doubt. Uncertainty is paralyzing.
So the defense mechanisms kick in, but they're not defending the facts of the situation, the merits of the decision or the relationship. They're defending the story about who we are.
Exactly. When we defend a bad decision, we're not really defending the mistake. We're defending the idea that I am the kind of smart, perceptive person who wouldn't make that mistake in the first place.
Which explains things like the sunk cost fallacy. You've put 10 years into a failing business, the data says get out, but your brain refuses.
It refuses because walking away means admitting those 10 years were, a miscalculation. And that creates a crack in the story of the self. The sources list all the lengths the brain will go to maintain that coherent story.
It defends bad decisions, it defends broken relationships, it even defends completely false political or social beliefs.
Yes, and it defends them not because they hold up to scrutiny. If you show it contradictory data, the brain will just rationalize it away, but because they feel coherent. They fit inside the existing self-narrative. To admit those things are wrong means rebuilding a huge part of your identity, and the brain sees that as a threat to its very existence.
That resistance is just a massive roadblock to learning anything new then. If we're always defending the story instead of seeking better information, we just get stuck.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the really uncomfortable part where this deception actually comes from.
This is where we have to look in the mirror. The sources offer this really tough truth. Most of the time, we're not being fooled by other people. We're fooled by the stories we tell ourselves.
We are our own biggest con artist. Our internal narrator prioritizes its own plot over everything else. I think realizing that the biggest obstacle is internal is actually really powerful. It means real progress has to start with self-interrogation.
Absolutely. Once you accept that certainty is just the brain's way of protecting its own story,
Well,
you can shift your goal from being right to being, brave. You stop trying to win arguments with others and you start consciously interrupting your own predictive process.
and that's the resolution this whole deep dive points to. The strongest minds, according to the sources, aren't the ones with the highest IQs. They're not the smartest people in the room who always have the answer.
No, not at all. Their real strength is defined by something else, their bravery.
Bravery.
It's the willingness to hit pause on that certainty machine, to override that deep, efficient need for a coherent story, and to ask that one incredibly difficult, self-threatening question, wait, what if my story is wrong?
That one question is the antidote. It's the conscious act of overriding the system that just wants to stick with what it already knows because it's easy and efficient. It takes real energy, real courage to open up your own operating system for a rewrite.
And that is the absolute key takeaway for anyone listening right now. Just understanding this, understanding the brain's built-in preference for prediction and coherence is the first most critical step. It's the awareness that lets you start checking your own stories and consciously work toward accuracy. It means you start looking for the error signals instead of just enjoying that warm, cozy feeling of being certain.
So, to wrap it all up, the reality you're living in right now is a prediction. It's a story your brain is building for certainty, not a perfect photograph of the truth. Real mental strength isn't about knowing everything. It's about having the guts to check your own assumptions, especially the ones that feel the most comfortable.
It's about fighting that very ancient, very human urge to just be consistent. It takes work, and it means being willing to sit with uncertainty for a little while.
Because the reward is getting closer to what's actually true.
Which leaves all of us with the final question the source material poses. It's something to think about long after this deep dive is over, something to ask your own internal narrator.
Do you question your thoughts? Or do you just enjoy how convincing they sound?